And I want to welcome you officially now to Paperwork Just Got Personal. And what we're covering today, EUDR, EPR, and tariffs, are topics that obviously, with over 700 of you having registered for today, are top of mind for many of you. I'm Dave Rosendahl, president here at Mindfire, and I have the honor of being your moderator today. I want to thank Sylvamo for sponsoring the event today. If you're not familiar with Sylvamo and their leadership role in our industry, I'm going to introduce them to you in just a moment. But the goal of our time together is to talk about what are arguably the four most important topics in the world of government affairs and the impact that these are having on the entire print industry. So clearly, with the number that I see here in the room and those of you who are registered, there's significant interest in these topics. Today, though, is actually the seventh in a series of conversations that Sylvamo has created for us, with each session kind of building on the one prior, designed to help us navigate these topics, all of the things that are changing in our industry. Because you know what, folks, we all need to work together to manage through this time of uncertainty. So if you missed any of the previous sessions that you see here on the screen, wait till the end. My team's going to compile a resource, or has compiled a resource, that's going to lead you to this resource library here with the recordings of everything from the past and some tools that you need in order to apply this to your work. I'm just curious, though, open up the chat. I want to know from all of you, who's here for the first time? For whom is this the first session that you're attending? Drop a 1 in the chat if this is your first time here. I want to see Bobby. I want to see Ann, Andrew. Okay, I see a number of 1s. Denise. Okay, a lot of 1s coming in. That's fantastic, folks. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you spending time with us today. Now, let me introduce to you the illustrious panel. And first up is Elizabeth Bartheld from Sylvamo. She's VP of Global Government Relations. And EB, as we call her, you're going to hear me reference her that way today in the event, leads this team globally and heads up Sylvamo's EU deforestation regulation efforts, which we're going to dive into today. And she brings with her deep Washington experience from her time at American Forest and Paper Association and as the chief of staff on Capitol Hill. EB, how are you? Thank you for being here with us today.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm excited to be here. Excited to see all these first timers for a GR call. That's great.
Yeah, it is cool to see so many people showing up. Next up on the screen here is Laura Pickard. She is Sylvamo's Director of Government Relations for North America, and she leads their extended producer responsibility team, which again is something we're talking about today. And she serves as an advisor to the Postal Service's Mailers Technical Advisory Committee. We call it MTAC if you're in the industry. And she's also a board member of Keep Us Posted. Laura, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Excited to be here and talk about these important issues.
As am I. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Mark Pitts. He's the Executive Director of Printing, Writing, Pulp, and Tissue at the American Forest and Paper Association. Now, Mark oversees advocacy for this sector. So his perspective is one that's got a finger on the pulse of the issues that we're covering today. And he brings perspective from his years at Gladfelder Paper Company in sales and marketing and in product development. Mark, this is also your first time as a panelist on one of these events, and we're grateful that you could be here with us today.
Thanks, Dave. I'm grateful to be here and looking forward to a great conversation today.
Thank you, sir. All right, we've got a bunch of people behind the scenes, as I've mentioned, who are managing and helping us engage you as you come into the room today. But this is an interactive event, and what I mean by that is I want all of you to make sure that the chat here in Zoom is open on your screen, okay? You'll see that in the toolbar. And the chat is for where we can talk back and forth to each other, where you can network, maybe make a few new friends. But then also you'll see this Q&A button. And I want you to open that up right now. Maybe somebody go ahead and do this for me as a little example. But this is where you can add a question. Somebody do that for me right now. Let's see who can be first. And the rest of you can upvote those questions so that what's important to you bubbles up to the top. With so many of you having registered, I'm sure we're not going to be able to get to all of your questions. And frankly, some of the answers to these questions are nuanced. You're going to need to lean on legal counsel and other experts for your specific situation because there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But we want to do our best to get you as much information as we can during the event today. And so we're going to use the Q&A feature to bubble up what's most important. We're going to try to leave time at the end for plenty of Q&A. And that's how we're going to address what's on your mind today. Now, one more very important thing about the chat today. Carissa, if you can bring it right on me. I want you all to hear me. You're listening and watching me here on the screen. These are complex and challenging issues that we're talking about today. I think you would all agree. What I want from you in the chat is I want you to be constructive. I want you to focus on solutions. We're all here to help each other. It's very easy to point out the problems. It's easy to go political on one of these issues here, but let's try to work together to be part of the solution, okay? Let's stay positive and let's be constructive in the chat. So this is an all play, everybody. I want you to drop a yes in the chat if you can do that for me. Drop a yes in the chat if you can do that for me. I need you guys to stay positive, be part of the solution. Okay, everybody's opting in there. Thank you for doing that. Here's what we've got planned for you today. I'm going to have EB first come up and give us kind of the inside scoop on D-Scoop and what's happening in Washington, including the latest on the tariffs, which I want to know, we all want to know. And then we're going to dive into the three big regulations that everybody's asking about: postal, EPR, EUDR. And then it's my job to bring us into land with plenty of time to tackle these real-time questions that you're going to be adding during the event today, and many of the questions that you submitted in advance. We're scheduled for about 60 minutes, but if you're engaged and if you still got questions at the end of that time, we're going to stick around to hit as much as we can with you. So remember, use the Q&A feature to bubble up your questions, and let's get the conversation going there in the chat. As people are saying things, I want you engaged in giving us real-time feedback. Now, EB, I know you've got a very exciting legal disclaimer that you want to share with us, and then some background on Sylvamo for those who may be new to the organization.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. You touched on it earlier. So this is a reminder that the information provided in this webinar does not and is not intended to constitute a legal advice. So please seek your own legal counsel. As Dave said earlier, fact patterns are different. So we'll try to be as helpful as possible. So a little bit about Sylvamo. We are a US-based global uncoded free sheet company. We're headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. We've got about 6,500 employees worldwide and about 1,800 in the US. We are the second largest uncoated free sheet paper in North America, producer in North America, excuse me. We primarily make and sell copy paper, commercial printing, converting, and specialty papers. We have a portfolio of iconic brands, including Hammermill, Accent Opaque, Williamsburg, and Spring Hill, and we're the global supplier for HP papers. So our US operations include 2 paper mills, one in Ticonderoga, New York, and one in Eastover, South Carolina. And we have a sheeting plant in Sumter, South Carolina. We have 3 mills in Brazil and 2 in Europe, including one in Sweden and one in France.
I think I need to visit all 3 of those. How's that sound?
I know, exactly. I think Sweden would be quite nice this time of year. A little bit about our name, and Dave, I'm not sure you know this, but our name is intentional. Of course, it is in Latin. Silva means forest, and amo means love. So love of forest.
That's really pretty incredible. I've done, what, 6, 7 of these already, and honestly, I had no idea that's the backstory behind your name. So thank you for sharing that. Learning something every day with you. Something else that is interesting, obviously, to me and to many of the others here is, you know, what's happening in Washington right now. There's just so much going on in the world, as I think you would all agree. But let's focus on what's happening in Washington. And if you could bring us current as of today, right? What should we know about what's happening right now?
So today, there's definitely a lot going on in DC. We're going to stick to domestic policy, though, and we're going to turn to Congress first and talk a little bit about what Congress is working on with President Trump's big domestic policy agenda, or also called the One Big Beautiful Bill. So the bill contains a wide range of provisions, including changes to tax policy, social programs, healthcare, and education. And as some folks know, this passed the House on a 1-vote margin right before the Memorial Day recess. The Senate is currently working on the bill. It's a little different than the House, and they hope to get their bill done before the July 4th recess. So as a company, we've been working on this legislation. We are one of the most highly capital-intensive manufacturing industries in the U.S., and so there's several business tax provisions, including 100% expensing and R&D tax credit that we care deeply about. Those were extended in the House bill and are made permanent in the Senate bill. But before I bore everybody with tax policy, let's move on to tariffs. So like many American businesses, we're closely tracking the development on tariffs.
Okay.
With manufacturing facilities in the US, in Europe, and in Brazil, tariffs could impact us in different ways. So let's level set about where we are right now on tariffs. And these are really the tariffs that are mainly impactful to our industry. There's a 25% tariff on autos. I didn't include that on this chart. So these are the tariffs in effect. So all countries have the 10% baseline tariff, the 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, and the derivatives. For Canada and Mexico, there's a 25% tariff, but that is on non-USMCA compliant goods. So USMCA is the trade agreement that was signed in the first Trump administration between the three countries. For us, pulp and paper, that's HTS code or harmonized tariff schedule, 47 and 48, that's pulp and paper. They are USMCA compliant. So what that means is it's a zero tariff. I know there's some book publishers on the call. That's harmonized tariff code 49. It really, the reason we are USMCA compliant is less to do with the harmonized tariff code and more to do with rules of origin and where the product is produced. On China, it's effectively a 30% tariff on Chinese imports, although in a social media post, President Trump said that effective tariff is about a 55% tariff. He's likely referring to a 25% tariff in his first administration. As you can tell, this gets complicated really fast.
Yep.
So again, it's really dependent on your own company's fact pattern, where you get your inputs, where you ship your products. So really consult your own legal counsel for how your specific products might be impacted with these tariffs. I do want to touch on a couple of tariffs that could impact this industry directly and a couple of things to look out for in the future. So one is the potential tariff on Section 232 for lumber and derivative products. Derivative products does include paper products. It was mentioned in the executive order. This came out in April. So what's happening now with that? The Department of Commerce is doing an investigation. Comments were submitted on this, and the report is due really any day now. We expect it. Once the report is out, the president then has 90 days to put in place remedies, which can include tariffs. So that's a big watch out for us. The other is if there's any kind of expiration of the USMCA compliant piece. And then, of course, the 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs, that ends July the 9th. So I think that's the next big inflection point. That 90-day pause was put in place to allow the administration time to work on trade deals. They've come out with the UK and China, but we haven't heard really anything on any other countries today.
Wow, EB, super clear. You really cleared it all up for us. No, I'm being facetious, obviously, and I know there's a lot of questions on this. So folks, be selfish. Drop your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer those. EB, when I'm talking to clients, a lot of what they ask me is around the administration's authority to even employ these tariffs. And so I'd love for you to just talk about where our understanding is of that right now.
Sure. So there's a lot going on, some legal cases. So some cases have been brought on the administration's authority under IEPA. That's the Economic Emergency Powers Act. And that's the authority the administration has used on the fentanyl tariffs, the ones on China, Canada, and Mexico, as well as the reciprocal tariffs that were in April. So essentially where that stands now is the U.S. Court of Appeals has granted the government's request for a stay pending the appeal. So that means the tariffs are still in place.
Okay.
The court has said that we will do an expedited briefing schedule. That's to start in mid to late July. So those tariffs are still in place until mid or late July. In addition, another group this week actually asked the Supreme Court to come in and leapfrog the lower courts. I've not heard if the Supreme Court will take the case or not, but depending on how all of this legal action shakes out, the administration could use other tariff policies to impose tariffs. And I think, frankly, some countries around the world are waiting until this legal issue shakes out a little further before they start completely negotiating with the administration.
Yeah,
let's go to the next slide.
Makes sense.
I think it's important to remember that there's several tools in the toolbox on trade. So right now, the administration's used IEPA, the Section 232, and Section 301. So if the courts rule against the administration on IEPA, the administration will likely use one of these other authorities to do the tariffs that they want. So essentially, be prepared for a bumpy ride. Turning to Sylvamo specifically, we talked a lot about the uncertainty, but we believe that we're well positioned to manage through this environment. Over 90% of our raw materials are sourced locally, with very little coming from China. And in Europe and in North America, more than 90% of our shipments stay within their respective regions.
This is good, EB, and I know there were questions about that as folks were registering. Sherry, I see you in the chat wondering if this is being recorded and if a link's going to be sent out. So I see Suzanne just answered, yes, folks, this is being recorded. I know there's a lot of information on the screen, but what we're trying to do is bring it to you in a way where hopefully it is illuminating some of the different facets that you need to be aware of. I want to ask the audience, open up the chat. Has this been helpful to you? Have you learned something? Give me a yes in the chat if something has been helpful to you in your understanding of this situation. Okay, good. That's good to know. EB, between the tariffs, the postal rate increase, EPR fees, all of that, I think one of the things I see clearly in the questions as people are coming into the room are concerns around what does that do to cost? What's the impact on cost? And we got a lot of questions asking how Sylvamo is planning to handle those pressures and what customers should expect. So could I ask you to tackle that head on before we dive deeper into the regulations? What is Sylvamo's perspective on that?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Of course, we all know cost is a concern for everybody, from tariffs to regulations and other public policy. So that's why we advocate on these issues to try to keep cost as low as possible. Over time, there are different pressures on input cost and final price, but we can't predict what will happen in the future.
Yeah. Not to interject in your talking points there, but I think that's an important thing to underscore. None of us can really predict what's going to happen. But folks, community, I think what we can do is we can continue to participate in discussions like this that Sylvamo is bringing us, hearing from leaders like EB and the others that are here on the panel and engaging constructively to work together to figure out how as an industry are we going to move forward with these challenges. So I want to move now to you, Mark, and start opening up the postal box here, as postal is definitely a hot topic for this audience. And we've covered it before in other sessions, but never from your AF&PA's industry perspective. So what's your take on what's been happening at USPS lately?
Sure, Dave, thanks for that. And I guess to begin with, I think as everybody knows, the paper and print value chain depends very heavily on the Postal Service to reach our end customer. The Postal Service, if you didn't know, has a monopoly on access to everyone's mailbox. And our postal advocacy has centered on making sure that monopoly power is not abused, so that mail can effectively compete with other forms of media from both a cost and service perspective. And I think everybody also knows that financially, the Postal Service has failed to cover its costs since 2006.
Yep.
And has accumulated losses since then of about $98 billion. That's with a B. And in 2021, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy came on board, and he spearheaded a 10-year strategic plan, which I think everyone knows is called the Delivering for America plan, the infamous plan, which projected that the Postal Service would reach break even by fiscal 2023, and that did not happen. Instead, financial losses have continued and service levels have suffered as a consequence. And as we look forward, the future of the Postal Service is more uncertain now than we have seen in years. The Delivering for America plan is failing. The Postmaster General DeJoy has retired. President Trump has considered things like potential privatization of the Postal Service, moving the Postal Service under the Department of Commerce, and rolling back the investments that they have committed to EV delivery vehicles. And then on top of that, we have a new Postmaster General. His name is David Steiner, who's expected to begin his new role in July. He's been appointed by the Postal Board of Governors and should come on board next month. And so far, the Delivering for America plan is still in effect, and with a rate increase that is planned to happen next month. And for AF&PA, we're working with our own government relations team. We work with members, and as part of the Postal Coalition of Keep Us Posted, to raise the visibility and the importance of mail and the millions of jobs that depend on mail throughout that supply chain, for mail to be competitive and predictable choice for media. And for us, it comes down to advancing policies that support postal rates and service levels that attract and keep mailers in the mail.
I see, Brett, you've got a great point there in the chat. Canadian Post is also having issues. So love to maybe have a chat about that at some point in one of these sessions. Mark, the other thing that you said that stood out to me is around just the level of uncertainty that we have right now. And again, not to keep harping on this idea, but I think this is why it's so important, Sylvamo, that you continue to bring us together in these conversations, because when there is this much change afloat, I don't think we should just wait and see what happens. We need to navigate these challenges together, and that's what today is really about. Now, the other thing you mentioned, Mark, that I want to underscore a little bit is that relative to the postal rate increase that we've got here in a few short weeks, there's a couple of things that I think are important for everyone to know. A few weeks back, I was with my good friend Chris Lean from BCC Software, and we did an industry update on this particular topic. And I thought this chart that we had in that meeting was particularly useful, because if you're trying to understand this very complex change, I haven't seen one this complex for quite a while. I think this will help make it as simple as we can and simplify what's a very complex topic. So the Postal Service isn't just changing prices on postage, they're also changing the baseline for work share discounts. When I say work share discounts, all I mean is the reduced postage rates that USPS gives us for doing basically their work, right? Making the barcodes, the intelligent mail barcode, sorting, transporting mail, all that stuff. You do that work, you get a discount. But here's the deal. Really, there's going to be two different price structures in July, depending on what you do. Everyone is going to see, on average, a 7.4 increase. That's what you're seeing here on the screen for both first class and marketing mail. And this is a big if, you're participating in the promotions, the growth incentives, all the stuff that we've talked about in prior sessions, that's what you will likely experience on average. But if you're not doing the promotions, if you're not participating in these things that we're talking about here, you're looking at that 10.4% increase in marketing mail and 8.1% for first class. So the bottom line here is, folks, if you do nothing, you're looking at additional 3 to 4% more in postage that you wouldn't need to pay if you're on top of it. Does that make sense, everybody? Give me a yes if that helped clarify some of this confusion here. Give me a yes in the chat if that was helpful. The question isn't about the rate increasing. That's going to happen no matter what. That is going to happen. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Because doing nothing is going to get a lot more expensive. So if you need help with this stuff, if you need help with the promotions, the incentives, automations, we've got prior sessions where we've covered some of these things, or let us know in the chat if you need help, and we'll do what we can to get you equipped to take the next step. Now, Laura, I'm going to bring you back on screen here, and to get you tapped into the conversation here, I'd love for you to share what Sylvamo's position is on the postal rate increases I just shared with the audience.
Sure. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Obviously, this is an issue we've talked about quite a bit in some of our past webinars. So I guess that's a plug for those of you who haven't seen those. They're definitely worth your time. Sylvamo, we care about this issue because we manufacture more than 1/3 of the paper that ends up going through the Postal Service. So it's critical to our business that USPS remains reliable and affordable. But it's also critical to many of you who are on the webinar today, obviously. So right now, obviously, we're getting close to this July rate increase. So we are very focused on two things. First, we are continuing to advocate for a halt to the postal rate increase. We are urging the Postal Service, since the new Postmaster General is coming into place soon, we think it's appropriate for them to pause the July rate increase until he can be in place. Second, we are supporting a bill in Congress. You'll see the number on the screen there. It's called the USPS Serves Us Act, and it, among other things, limits postal rate increases to once per year, and it empowers the Postal Regulatory Commission to stop USPS decisions that, as Mark outlined, have frankly been driving it into financial ruin. So as you mentioned, Dave, we are a member of Keep Us Posted. They were on a previous webinar of ours here as well. There is an action alert currently on their website on both of these issues that I would encourage everybody on today's webinar, if you care about this issue, to take a look at and consider sending to your member of Congress. I know it will be included, a link to that in the resources that we send out later. Lastly, I'll say with the new Postmaster General coming in July, we are very hopeful that he will implement some important changes. And we will be working hard to engage with him to make sure that he knows our views about the future of the Delivering for America plan and the impact of postal rates on our business.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And folks, again, if you have questions, please open up that Q&A box in Zoom, look through the questions that are already there, and then upvote the ones that are important to you so that when we get to Q&A, we're able to address your specific questions. But Laura, I got one more question for you here. How the heck did you get a picture with Ben Franklin?
So this is the Keep Us Posted Mother's Day event that they do every year. It's a great event. We have cards that Hill staffers and members of Congress come to and can send to a mother in their life. This year we had Ben Franklin there in person. You'll see Evie and I got a good picture with him.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I've mentioned a few times about your leadership role, Sylvamo, Evie, and Laura, in helping the industry navigate these changes. And I want to speak briefly to you folks that are here with us around another value that Sylvamo is bringing. They call that intelligent paper. You may have heard us talk a little bit about this on prior episodes, but this is a partnership with my company, Mindfire, that puts personalized tracking technology directly onto your mail pieces. What I mean by that in a nutshell is think personalized URLs, think personalized QR codes, and an entire enterprise-grade omni-channel technology solution that lets you measure response to your direct mail campaigns, improve ROI, just like you do with digital. Probably the easiest way to understand this, what Sylvamo is bringing you, look at the screen, everyone. I want you to look at the screen. Most direct mail that we do is difficult to measure, but intelligent paper solves for that. And what I mean by that is this is a dashboard that is going to be brought to you by the Sylvamo Mindfire Intelligent Paper Initiative that you'll get with intelligent paper, which means that not only are you seeing how your mail is performing, the mail tracking, informed delivery, how many people are responding to it, but if you look over there on the right-hand side, most importantly, we're tying that to the revenue that your mail is generating. So to understand what's driving the results you need, you can get breakdowns by, what are we looking at here? List, by different deciles and so on, so that you understand how to get more of what you need and stop doing what's not working for your campaigns. The idea is that this transforms mail from, well, we sent it and we hope it's going to work, to here's exactly what's working and how we can make it better. So the investment that Sylvamo is making in helping you do this is they are subsidizing the Mindfire technology costs for mail drops of around 350,000 pieces, okay? Sylvamo is subsidizing that cost. So you're going to get enterprise level campaign tracking at no extra cost. You can, if you're a printer, a mail service provider, you can offer that to your customer. If you're a mail owner and you're doing direct mail, then that's another great opportunity for you. What they're asking for in exchange, obviously use their paper for the direct mail and agree to share the anonymized results of that campaign for a case study designed to show that direct mail still works. We all want that, right? You need that. We need that. The industry needs that to fight back on these budget meetings that I know are happening across the US where somebody is saying, hey, let's cut the mail budget. Postage is going up, cut mail. So this gives our industry the ammunition we need to prove that mail works in a digital obsessed, digital inundated world. If this sounds of interest to you and you want to learn more, Suzanne, go ahead and roll the poll here. I want to see from folks how many of you are interested. Before we get into EPR, look at your screen here. Suzanne is going to roll a poll. I'm going to leave it up for a few seconds. I need you to go look at your screen. If you would like to learn more about Sylvamo's intelligent paper program, yes, no, not right now. I'm going to give you about another 15 seconds, folks. Let us know. We'll have a friendly person call you and talk you through it if you're interested to find out more and take you into some of the details. Suzanne, let's leave it up for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's take a look and share those results there just real quick with everyone. So we've got yes at 49%, no thanks 15%, and not right now 37%. Fantastic, folks. Thank you for that. We'll definitely follow up with all of you on that. Now, Mark, I want to come back to you. Let's move on to EPR, extended producer responsibility. This is another issue that's very important to the industry. So tell us what it means and why should we care about this?
Sure, happy to. And I'll just start by saying that just a level set, EPR is an environmental policy in which the financial responsibility for recycling of multiple materials is moved from municipalities to businesses.
Okay.
I think it's important for everybody to understand that EPR is really, it's a two-step process. The first step is the legislation itself, and this authorizes an EPR program to be put in place, and I would describe that as getting to yes. And then there's implementation, which involves interpreting the intent of the legislation, puts the program into action, includes setting and collecting fees. And EPR programs typically call for a non-elected producer responsibility organization, also called a PRO, to manage that program and to set annual fees. And the fees are used to fund recycling programs that are authorized by the legislation. Historically, EPR covered hard to recycle or hazardous products like paint or carpet or batteries. And in the last decade, there's been a push to expand EPR to include packaging as well. And this was primarily in response to the big growth in plastic pollution and the e-commerce shift that came with COVID, where the amount of cardboard being delivered to people's homes increased dramatically. And recently, there's been an expanded effort to add printing paper to the EPR programs as well. And unfortunately, this has been done in a number of states with very little consideration for the complex supply chain that's involved in printing papers and what actually ends up in the recycling bin. So I think if there was one key takeaway message about what EPR is, it is that EPR today has morphed significantly from its original intent and has become nothing really more than a gigantic funding mechanism that shifts the cost of recycling from taxpayers to business. And in the nomenclature of EPR, that's what they call the producers. Business responsible partners are the producers. And this EPR language that's been written into these bills has been carefully crafted to garner the support of legislators. And it allows them to demonstrate that they're actually doing something to solve the problems of plastic pollution, about excessive waste, about fixing what some people call a broken recycling system. But these are really essentially aspirational goals, and they're made very easy for policymakers to say yes. However, what's not in any of these EPR bills that are introduced is any indication about what the consumer's responsibility is, or what the cost is involved in implementation of these bills. And not only do these bills totally omit the price tag associated with EPR, they ignore the fact that the paper industry has already taken great responsibility and has heavily invested in recycling. And we've got results that are light years ahead of any other material that are in the mix.
I know a lot of questions came in around this as folks were registering, so please take time to add those into the Q&A. My good friend Deborah Korn, I see, is also answering questions in chat, another industry expert. Thank you, Deb, for doing that. I appreciate your help there in the chat. Now, Laura, I want to get your voice in on EPR and tell us a little bit more about how it's being implemented in the United States right now.
Thank you. So as you can see on the screen here, there were 5. Now there are 7 EPR programs currently being implemented across the US. Oregon, Colorado, California, Maine, and Minnesota. Maryland and Washington were added this year because they both passed EPR this year. So paper is included in Oregon and Colorado. It's also included in Maryland and Washington. Washington does have some really good exemptions written into the law, though, frankly, because stakeholders like AF&PA have spent 3 years ironing out the language to make sure that it ends up in a good place, as opposed to Maryland, for example, where they just added all paper in at the last minute. So right now there's only one PRO in the US, that's Circular Action Alliance, or CAA, as we call them. They are officially the PRO in Oregon, Colorado, California, and Minnesota. Maine may end up having multiple ones, and the other states just aren't far enough along yet. So Oregon is the first one out of the gate here. They're the farthest along in implementation, and first fees are going to be due July 1st. As folks are looking at these EPR regulations, I want them to look at 3 things. First, is printing writing paper included in the bill? So as I mentioned, there are a couple of states here where it is. Second, if it is, how is paper defined? Are there exemptions for any items? Like I mentioned, Washington State has really good exemptions. Number 3 is, how is producer defined? Because that will determine who pays the fees. There's usually a hierarchy of obligation in terms of first this person pays, and if not them, then this person. But every state program is different. And so companies really need to look at the individual pieces of legislation, and they need to read the guidance documents from CAA to see if you think you're in the program.
Wow. Mark, help us out here. Who's actually paying and how much?
Sure. As this slide shows here, depending on how the state crafts the legislative language of these bills, companies anywhere along the printing and writing paper supply chain could be obligated to pay the fees.
Okay.
And if there are flawed definitions and unclear terms, these can result in fees being applied to unintended products, could be applied to multiple producers or multiple times. So that's really important. In Oregon and Colorado, for instance, for printing and writing paper, the company who is the brand owner or the licensee is responsible for paying that fee. And for anything that requires specialty printing, the publisher, like a magazine or catalog publisher, is responsible for paying the fee for that paper. And the overall intent is that those that are responsible for printing paper products that are in the recycling bin, they end up there to be responsible. So if you are a direct mailer, for example, this likely includes you. Printed envelopes distributed to end users are also included in this category. For book publishers, the good news for you is that most of these bills exempt bound books from the EPR. And there are also some exemptions for small companies with low volumes or low distribution rates. The EPR implementation, it's really complicated very quickly.
Yep.
It can have very unexpected outcomes if not done right. And for example, free riders can increase program costs for everyone registered in the system. And last month, CAA announced their fees for Oregon printing paper producers.
Okay.
And this final fee represented 3 or 4 times what the initial estimate was, which was quite a shock. And clearly, this is a bad result for those who have registered as printing paper producers, and it really raises some extremely serious questions about what assumptions were used, what the modeling was behind determining how these fees would be applied, and these things need to be addressed. In fact, we have a call with CAA next week to bring some of these questions to them. And in addition to fees, in Oregon, for example, there may be penalties for non-compliance, which in Oregon could be as much as $25,000 a day. So,
$25,000 a day.
yes.
Yeah, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, and you're certainly educating me as well as the audience here, my understanding is that EPR has been around in other countries, right, for a while. So I'm curious if there's any lessons that we can learn from those countries vis-a-vis these fees and what might happen here in the US.
Yes, so EPR has been in place in Europe for quite some time. It's really started there and it has moved to Canada as well. And some of the example that you see here on the screen from British Columbia, I think provides a very cautionary tale for us. The EPR fees already in place in British Columbia show that these costs have dramatically increased over time, and they also represent a big increase on the cost of paper production for paper manufacturers that, as we mentioned before, essentially do not benefit recycling because of the things that we're already doing without EPR mandates. And these costs will ultimately be borne by the customer and the consumer. In addition to the cost of material collection and processing, what we've seen is these EPR bills, they just keep layering on additional costs.
Okay.
It's not just the cost of recovering a product, but that could be additional cost for waste disposal, capital costs for new technology upgrades, consumer education, cost of program administration, and the development of recycling end markets. Unlike recycling fees for other products like oil, like tires or mattresses, the recycling fee for paper products could easily reach 30 to 40% of the value of the product. And we know that EPR fees in the US that will be imposed on business will be incredibly consequential.
Okay.
For example, in Maryland, which was just, that bill was approved, they did a needs assessment in Maryland, and they estimated the cost of recycling to be about $550 million. And in New Jersey, they just did an economic impact study, and they estimated the cost in their state to be $1.2 billion a year.
Wow.
And that is
Laura,
those costs that are going to be foisted onto business, and that, in our view, is just not sustainable.
yeah. Deborah Korn, thank you there in the audience helping us with some of these questions here. Folks, has this been helpful to you? I'd love to know in the chat if this is helpful. Give me a yes or in the chat if you're learning something here about this important update. Laura, I want to turn this next question to you. Specifically, what is Sylvamo doing to get ready to comply in some of these states that are coming online?
Thanks. At Sylvamo, we have an overarching value, and that is that we always do the right things in the right ways for the right reasons. So we are obeying the laws on the books in these states. We have registered as a producer in the 4 states where it is currently required. That is Oregon, Colorado, California, and Minnesota. We submitted our sales data for Oregon. As I mentioned, fees begin in July.
Yep.
Since Sylvamo is an obligated producer, we are preparing to pay the fees required on our products, including Sylvamo brands and related packaging. Data for Colorado will be due July 31st, and data for California is due August 31st, even though we don't have a final program plan for either state yet. So we are working on compiling that data now. We're also holding calls with customers and other folks in the supply chain. Today's webinar is a good example to give them a heads up about EPR and how we're working to comply.
Yeah, I see people in the chat saying very helpful, eye-opening, but also very disturbing. I'm wondering, what would your advice be for somebody perhaps in this call right now who's just learning about this for the first time? What should that person do?
Sure, that's what this slide is trying to show. First, as we've said before, this is not legal advice, so please have your own counsel review the EPR regulations to see if you're an obligated producer and need to pay fees. Second, Circular Action Alliance is a really good resource. They have guidance out, like I mentioned previously, for Oregon and Colorado that details which products have fees placed on them and who needs to pay.
Okay.
If you think you are an obligated producer, then you should look into registering with them. Third, I would say get in touch with folks in your supply chain to help with compliance, and this will help limit the possibility for double counting, double paying fees. Lastly, join us in advocacy. We need your help to limit the cost of EPR for all of us. So check with your trade association, or if you're not a member, consider joining one. Like AF&PA, they can be really great advocates for all of us on EPR.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, so folks, if you've got questions on any of that, I know we're flying over at 50,000 feet, but please drop those in the Q&A. I want to make sure we answer your questions. Laura, thank you for those details. Mark, now I want to turn to one more chapter here. Let's move on to another acronym, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR. What's this all about?
This has been my life for the last year and a half.
Okay.
But just the highest level of EUDR it's one component of a very comprehensive part of the European Green Deal policy. It's a regulation that bans the import or export of products in the European Union that may be linked to deforestation and forest degradation. It covers a multitude of products, including cattle, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, rubber, soil, wood, and wood-derived products, which includes pulp and paper products. Regulation is scheduled to start enforcement on December 30th of 2025, and it imposes some unprecedented obligations and some very prescriptive due diligence requirements before covered products can be placed in the EU market. You can see that on your slide. That includes information gathering, which includes geolocation coordinates of all plots of land where a product originates, time and date range of production. It requires proof that the products are deforestation free and forest degradation free going back to December of 2020. It includes contact information for upstream and downstream suppliers and customers. It requires that products have been produced in accordance with the legislation of the country, and all shipments must be accompanied by an approved due diligence statement with all the required information entered into this EU information system and approved by EU authorities. There are other additional obligations of assessment and risk mitigation based on the EU's determination of a country's overall deforestation risk, which is classified as either low, standard, or high. And just last month, the EU Commission classified both the US and Canada as low risks. However, the basic obligations that I just outlined still apply regardless of risk level.
There's a lot, Mark. So even with the low risk designation, what's your advice to those of us here in the US? What should we be thinking about here?
Unfortunately, this is going to affect all US pulp and paper producers who import directly into the EU, or to those who have customers that applies to any EU importer of record, which they call operators. And the cost of compliance will definitely increase the cost of production for paper, with absolutely no benefit to the intent of the regulation, because US forest product sector does not contribute to global deforestation. EUDR has a direct technical compliance challenge and poses potential cost impacts on pulp and paper producers. But we also can't forget the regulation also applies to imports of things like books, other printed materials that may affect those who are on this webinar as well. If you are the importer, you are subject to EUDR obligations, and you're part of the supply chain for a customer who is an importer, then you have information requirements that you need to pass on to your customer. From a really big picture standpoint, EUDR is precedent setting, and that it extends the EU's sustainability laws and commitments beyond its own borders to everybody else.
Yep.
And for the US forest product sector, these very extremely prescriptive obligations represent a significant barrier to trade to our exports to the EU that are valued at over $3.5 billion. It also totally upends the international trade policy element that we call proportionality, which is really the level of due diligence that is proportional to the level of risk. In addition to that, EUDR requirements and forest-related definitions that are in it, like what constitutes forest degradation, will be a template that will be adopted much more widely by others than the EU. In fact, we've already seen, like in the state of New York, the Trees Act, where they attempted to do the same thing in New York for procurement of paper for the state. Luckily, that didn't pass, but that's the good news. But this one-size-fits-all requirement is overly prescriptive, and it fails to acknowledge that the U.S. forest products industry supply chain does not contribute to global deforestation. Our biggest roadblock to compliance is this obligation to produce precise geolocation coordinates.
Yep.
All the plots of land, it could be linked to every shipment of product, and prove that all of those plots of land are deforestation free. Our industry has already invested heavily in certification systems and standards that include third-party audits to ensure that responsible forest management practices are implemented rigorously both in the forest and in fiber procurement operations. And just the nature of our supply chain, 90% of which includes wood fiber inputs from multiple sources that include almost 11 million private landowners, hundreds of sawmills. And this makes geolocation requirements as prescribed by EUDR extremely difficult, and for some of those inputs, just totally unworkable. This is especially true for the byproducts of sawmill residuals that represent 40% of the fiber that we use. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to trace those inputs back to the exact plot of land where it may have originated. EUDR also puts the pulp and paper industry producers at a very distinct competitive disadvantage compared to their EU counterparts. With every shipment of product, that could easily include tens of thousands of plots of lands, and the compliance cost associated with that are exponentially higher than those countries with fewer landowners or with fewer obligations like the EU.
Sheesh. I want to know what everyone's thinking here in the chat. I see your comment there, Warren and Mark. I know we're getting to the end of our time here, so I want to pick up the pace just a little bit on this, but certainly a very important topic. I know that the organization that you lead, AF&PA, has been advocating on behalf of the industry, the U.S. paper industry, relative to this regulation. So just briefly, what are you doing there?
Sure. We achieved our first two objectives here, which was to delay implementation until 2025. This would have been effective in 2024. We also wanted to ensure the U.S. was classified as a low-risk country. That's happened. We leaned heavily on the U.S. government to make sure that EUDR was listed by the U.S. Trade Representative as a non-tariff trade barrier. That has been done. And we continue to elevate EUDR with our government partners like the U.S. Trade Representative, Department of Commerce, USDA, and the White House to bring this issue to the fore and be part of their trade negotiations that happen. We are focusing on two major areas: the geolocation requirement for low-risk countries, which is our largest and most costly compliance hurdle, and the competitive advantage the EU has over U.S. companies when it comes to the due diligence process. So this is also incredibly challenging to print product producers like book publishers. We've also worked with AAP along those lines and engaged them directly. But the reality is we don't have till the end of the year. Shipments to the EU will happen in November. So we need to have certainty basically by Halloween of what our obligations are so that we can make sure that we can comply.
EB, briefly, I want to get your voice on this since this is set to apply starting December 31, 2025. What is Sylvamo doing to get customers ready?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. So like AF&PA, we advocated for the delay and are pleased with the EU's decision to give businesses and their own member state governments more time who were not ready last year. So we made some great strides towards compliance. We're continuing to work with suppliers, customers, and business partners to support the traceability and due diligence compliance. We've continually tested the EU IT system that's called Traces. Since December of 2023, we were actually among one of 100 companies in the EU pilot testing the EU Traces system. We've offered feedback with the regulators on how to make the Traces system function better. We created what we are calling Tree Trace. Try to say that 3 times fast. It's a custom solution that reports required information into the EU Traces system. Tree Trace is a modern data landscape platform to onboard, prepare, submit, and receive and store EUDR specific data that meets the Article 9 or the the data collection objective of the regulation. So Mark touched on risk and mitigation. We're developing a comprehensive risk assessment to review our fiber suppliers. This includes issuing a questionnaire, verifying supporting documentation, and conducting audits. We will also specify specific mitigation actions for anything more than a negligible risk of noncompliance. And we will review assessments annually to prevent noncompliant fibers from entering into our supply chain. We will describe our due diligence system and other relevant information on Sylvamo.com. The format and scope of due diligence reporting will be based on the recently released country benchmarking system that Mark referenced to meet the regulations requirements. We're pursuing several different customer data sharing capabilities as we enable the Tree Trace system, including EUDR data delivery via email to customers and an API for customer self-service. More information to come on that. That's a big outstanding issue. And we'll test the process to ensure that there's sufficient time to address any issues before the compliance deadline.
I'm sure, EB, that there's folks that are hearing about this for the first time today. If they're just learning about it, similar to what I asked you a moment ago, where does somebody start if they want to learn how this is going to impact them specifically and how they should comply? Where do they start? So
first, reach out to your suppliers and start to discuss compliance. We've had numerous calls with customers to explain our process and plans, and we'll follow up this call with a letter on our progress so our customers on this call can remain informed.
Okay. Folks, I know we're getting to the end of the time. Please stick around with us. We've got a couple of more questions for you, and then we're going to get to some of your questions that were submitted here. If you're like me and many here in the room, you're still getting up to speed on these issues, right? So I'm going to ask Suzanne to throw another poll here on the screen. If working with Sylvamo, we could bring you a workshop. And when I say workshop, a more hands-on look at these regulations, like we've done with the USPS postage promotions and growth incentives, would that be useful to you? Would that be of interest to you, to your team, to your staff, if we were to bring such a workshop to you? So Suzanne's got the poll on screen. Would you like a workshop to go into detail on how Sylvamo is preparing for these regulations? Go ahead and leave it up for about another 5 seconds there, Suzanne. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's draw that down and quickly see where folks are at. That's interesting. They would like both. Not a surprise there, Sylvamo team. One more poll that I want to know, since we're on a roll with the polls here. Suzanne is going to throw up a few additional topics on the screen here. These are future session potential topics, and we'd love to know which of these would help you, your business, your clients, and your feedback here is going to help us prioritize what's going to be of most value to you in an upcoming session. So go ahead and select the ones that are going to be most useful to you around sustainability, strategies to offset postal rate increases. We didn't even talk about this, but there's a catalog promotion for postage that saves 10 to 12%. That's another one. Using digital channels and direct mail together to drive response rates. And you can read the others here. AI is another big one. So I'm going to leave this up for another 5 seconds, Suzanne, and then let's get into the questions. 4, 3, 2, 1. Close it up, Suzanne. I am very curious here to see what's on the minds of the audience here. So share that with everyone. It looks like the top items, AI. Yep, not a surprise there. The impact AI is having on direct mail is number 1, followed with savings on postage. All right, we'll carefully parse those folks, and we'll work with the good Sylvamo team to take a look at prioritizing those. So now we are about a minute past the hour mark here that we set. If you need to leave and if you want the recording, let us know in the chat. But otherwise, stick around. I've asked the panel to hang back and make sure we answer as many questions as possible. So if you have to leave, let us know in the chat that you want the recording, and also give your appreciation to the panel who's just done an amazing job helping us understand what's a very set of complex issues. I'm going to throw these questions at you, panel, put you on the hot seat here. Mark, I'm going to come at you first. One of the questions that we got was, how are you anticipating change in the industry in the coming 5 years? And Mark, what advice would you have for new people in the industry?
Dave, first of all, change is inevitable and change is good. I think if you look at our industry, we've been around for over 200 years. What other industry do you know of that was around 200 years ago and is still thriving? So I think that change is there. I think what characterizes our industry is resilience and adapting to change. Our industry has adapted to changes in demand for products and created innovation that has kept us being a large part of the U.S. economy. We've got over 925,000 people employed in our industry. We're in the top 10 manufacturers of 44 states. And while there have been lots of changes, depending on what sector you're in the paper industry, our value is over $435 billion in sales. So we are still a very large part of the economy. We are a leader in sustainability. We are a leader in innovation, and we use state-of-the-art technology. So for those of you who are thinking about the industry, there's still a lot for you to come.
Laura, I'm going to throw this next one at you because I know you've got a flight to catch here. A question that came in. I'd like to learn more about EPR in Colorado and what regulations and compliance requirements are for me and what will be implemented.
Sure. Colorado, the draft program plan is out now from Circular Action Alliance. So I would recommend reaching out to them. Like I said, the draft program plan's out. There's a draft guidance document that they have as well. And fees are set to start in January of 2026. So definitely take a close look at that and get legal counsel to help you.
Okay. Mark, I'm going to throw this next one at you around EPR. The question was, what about branded products we provide to other retailers? We wouldn't necessarily know what state they're shipped to.
It's a good question, and it's a little bit of an open switch, I have to say. I don't think that is clearly defined in the bills. May have some regulatory clarification, but I would say the best thing to do was get in touch with the PRO to try to get some clarity in terms of whether it applies to you or not, based on the definition of a producer.
I have a question for the audience before I come to you, Evie. I'm going to give you the next question here. For those of you who are still here in the room, and I see hundreds of you here, what's one thing that you learned today? What's one thing that stood out to you? I want you to take a moment, think about that, and drop that into the chat, because not only is it helpful for you and your learning to think about that and write it down, but it's also useful for the others here in the room to learn from those around them. So take a moment, drop in the chat what stood out. I see Jace saying, thanks, Dave and panel. Excellent session, as always, with these ladies. Thank you, Jace. That's good to hear. So, EB, I'm going to come to you with this next question here as the audience is thinking about what stood out to them. The question, EB, is, are books already printed and being stored in a US or UK warehouse considered placed on the market?
Thanks, Dave, for that. I think they would need to be placed on the EU market to be considered placed on the market. So simply being in the US or UK would not be enough. It needs to be placed on the EU market.
Okay. I'll throw this next one at you as well. Is the white paper industry making any investments in the US?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. So a couple months ago, we announced a big investment in our South Carolina facilities, a roughly $150 million investment, $100 million going into our paper mill in Eastover, South Carolina, to speed up a paper machine, getting us about 60,000 more short tons per year. And then we also announced a $45 million project at the Sumter sheeting plant. We're going to put in a whole new sheeter to bring up our efficiency. So we're real excited about those investments, real excited to be investing in the uncoated free sheet industry. It's the industry we believe in. And we're excited to be invested in South Carolina.
Mark, we have a lot of direct mailers here, print and mail companies, as well as brands that do direct mail. And Mark, I'm going to throw this one at you. How will EPR impact mailers?
Essentially, as we talked before, EPR applies to a brand owner. So if you are a mailer, let's say you are an insurance company or a banking company, and you're putting out direct mail with your logo on the envelope, you are a producer, most likely. So you need to pay attention to these state laws and to the PRO and the requirements there.
I am reminded of the fact that, folks, when you signed up, many of you gave us your mailing address to start to receive mail from Sylvamo. And there's going to be samples and other very useful information that Sylvamo will start to mail you. If you didn't take the opportunity to do that, please let us know in the chat. We'll follow up with you. We'd love to get your address. It's going to be a direct mail campaign promoting a variety of different things that you can do with Sylvamo, products, services, et cetera, and education around things like the USPS promotions, which, by the way, we have clarity on now for 2026. So if you would like to be on that list and get physical direct mail, that is ultimately what we're talking about here, please let us know there in the chat, and we'll make sure to get that over to you. Mark, another question for you. Are there ongoing efforts to clarify the specific definition of producers under EPR legislation?
Absolutely, yes. And this is what we do. When we see a bill introduced, then we go to work combing through that bill, identifying the problem areas, and when we see problems, we contact those policymakers and try to make changes. That's a big part of what we do.
Evie, I'm going to ask you the question I asked Mark a moment ago. I would like to hear your perspective on this as well, in terms of the changes that are coming to the industry and what we're anticipating over the next 5 years, and then specifically advice that you would have for new or younger folks coming into our industry. What would you say to somebody like that?
I think from a Sylvamo perspective, we're singularly focused on uncoated free sheet. We believe that there will be a need for it for a long time. Uncoated free sheet remains the largest and most resilient printing and writing paper, and we view it as an opportunity. We're investing to strengthen our competitive advantage, like the investment I just talked about. So yeah, essentially the advice would be, don't be afraid. You heard Mark ticking off the size of the industry. It is a huge, still very much a huge manufacturing industry in the US. So come join us, come advocate with us for the young people, and we'd be pleased to have you.
I see those of you who are interested in getting the physical pieces. Let us know there in the chat, and we will make sure that after today's event, we will follow up with you and get that to you. Laura, I know that you are leaving here shortly in 5 minutes. What I'd love to know from you, Laura, is as you've looked through the chat, Has anything stood out to you that you think you want to touch on or clarify? I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
No, I'll just say there's obviously still a lot of questions out there about EPR in particular. It seems like there's a lot that folks still need to learn about it and figure out how it affects them. And we're here as a resource and we want to help. And I'm glad that you all joined today, and please keep coming back.
So you mentioned the resources. Carissa, if you don't mind, let's share this on the screen as well. You're all going to get access to this resource section here on the Sylvamo website. You'll get an email from us with a link to this, and it will also include a PDF that's been created specifically for this session that's going to have links to all the stuff that we talked about on tariffs, postal, EPR, EUDR, etc. And so make sure to check your email for that. We'll be sending that to you. EB, same question back to you. As you've looked through the chat, we've had some great dialogue questions. Deborah Korn has done a great job answering some of those for us. Anything that you see there that you would like to underscore, EB?
I think just a lot of questions around tariffs. I know it's frustrating. It changes daily. I think I'm on version 31 of a tariff PowerPoint I have for our commercial team. So just hang in there. We'll get through it. We'll get through it together. And those two inflection points, those 2 points I spoke about earlier, the 232 on national security for the lumber industry could loop in the paper side, both printing and corrugated. So be mindful of that and that report coming from Congress. And I think the other is the expiration of the reciprocal tariffs and what happens then on July 8th, 9th timeframe. Does that pause get extended and we get some more trade deals or frameworks out of the administration?
Mark, what do you see there in the chat that you think stands out to you? We've had a lot of engagement there.
I think people are very concerned about the cost implications of what we talked about. And I think it's important that you all know that we can't do this alone. It's not somebody else's job, it's everybody's job. So there will be opportunities to engage insertion points as EPR legislation happens. There'll be more to come here on EUDR in the fall. I'd say get engaged. If you care, then be part of the solution.
I see a question that came in around how has mailing volume been in 2025? And what programs are printers able to enroll in to offset postal increases? Let me take the second part of that question. That's the quicker one. That resource guide that the team's sending you and that I think Suzanne dropped into the chat there covers a number of those opportunities that as mailers you have or mail service providers you have to save on postage. So that includes the postage promotions, somewhere between 3 to let's say 6% in savings. There's one that's 10 to 12 that's upcoming later this year. So there's the promotions, there's the growth incentives, the growth incentive, the mail growth incentive being the one that I think got the most attention recently. Again, we've got resources and guides on that. And then there's other things that we can do as well to help you in terms of saving postage. Now, the question around mail volume is an interesting one. I did do a little research because I did see that question come in advance. What I see here is interesting as I look at where mail is headed. I think we all know, but this is from USPS data, mail volume continues to decline, but revenue is growing because of the postage rate increases. So what they're saying is total mail volume is down 1.9%. First class mail pieces fell 5.9%. Let's call it 6%. But despite those volume declines, revenue has increased almost 4% due to the pricing strategies. In terms of what they see going ahead, let's see, Carissa, do you mind sharing this on screen? There is a good resource here. I phoned my friend Chris Lean, and from the Office of the Inspector General, there is some good data here. We can send you this link if you need this around what is expected going forward. I pulled out a few of the stats here. Best case scenario, what they're looking at is that the decline for direct mail is going to be about 14%. Worst case scenario, we're looking at 41% based on their projections. First class mail they're expecting is going to decline faster than marketing mail. So bottom line here, folks, is mail volumes are going to continue to go down, but we have an opportunity with many of the things that we've been talking about in these sessions here to continue to do what we can to make mail as valuable as we know it can be in the marketing landscape. So some really good data here, interactive data that you can look through. Happy to share that with you. If you would like that, let me know in the chat and we'll get that link over to you. All right, folks, we have a number of you here still in the room. Did you get value out of today's session? Drop a yes there in the chat. If you got value out of the session here, I want to make sure that the panel knows. Laura, I believe, has already stepped out. Thank you to Laura. I want to make sure that EB is thanked. Mark, thank you for your time as well. You've been all so gracious in your time today. And people are asking for the link. People would like the recording. Awesome. It looks like you're getting a lot of kudos here, team. And folks, to all of you, thank you for being here. I know today is the holiday for many, and the fact that you would be here with us today is certainly a gift to us. And I just want you to know, as we're wrapping up today here, that all of these changes that we're talking about, the way we look at this is that you're not alone, right? EB and Laura and the whole Sylvamo team, they didn't have to spend their afternoon with us walking through these tariff updates and compliance strategies. And Mark is certainly very gracious with his time, but we all did this. They all did this because we're in it together. And so Sylvamo sponsors these sessions for us, not because they have to, but because when we lean in together as an industry, we can all work together to succeed. Second, I think that now is the time to act, folks. We've got the postal rate increases hitting in, less than a month. The EUDR compliance deadlines that we're talking about, December 31st, EPR programs rolling out across multiple states. These aren't things that are going to happen someday. This is stuff that's happening now. But I think the good news is that for most of you being here in this webinar, you're a step ahead of your competitors now. You've got the inside track on at least the things you need to be thinking about, the things that you need to be thinking ahead to. And so don't let this just sit in your inbox. Don't let this just be another webinar. Start to have those conversations with your legal team, as we've talked about. Reach out to your suppliers, get educated, take advantage of the postal promotions, learn them now so that when July comes around, you're ready, and do what you can now to get ahead of all of these significant issues. So with that, I want to give you, EB, an opportunity from Sylvamo to say thank you to the group that's here and any closing wise words that you want to share with us.
Thanks, Dave. No, just a big thank you to the audience. Thanks for joining. Thanks for your engagement and your questions. We really appreciate it. I joke sometimes, keep calm and carry on. As we steal from our UK friends, there's a lot going on, but we are in this together, as Dave and Mark said. So if anybody wants to come to Washington, let us know. We're happy to take you around the hill. We will make you then lobby, Dave. Sounds good. But come join us. It's great for the members of Congress to hear from folks that do this job daily and can really probably explain it better than us. So please come. We look forward to having you. And thanks again for your engagement.
I'm headed there in July. Let's follow up offline. I definitely want to do that. I will take you up on that. Gwen says, thank you so much, Mark, EB, and Laura. David, you're always so informative. Gwen, thank you for that. Chris is saying, if only we had a legal team. EB, we've talked about that a little bit. Chris, it's good to see you here. Mark, over to you. I'd love to give you an opportunity to say thank you to the audience that's here and any wise words that you have as we exit today.
I don't know I have any wise words, Dave. Just a great thanks for putting this together, an opportunity to really get the word out. That's a big part of what we do, is try to explain, provide information, and the door is always open here at AF&PA. If people have questions, happy to help. And as EB said, it's really important on some of these things to get up on the hill and advocate. To some degree, we are talking heads, and members of Congress really like to see the real people, real names, real faces who are impacted by these things.
Fantastic. Alan saying another fantastic presentation. Thanks for being an amazing source for critical information. Yes, thank you, Sylvamo, EB, Laura, Mark, thank you as well, of course. And most of all, thank you to everybody who's still here with us. And if you're watching this in the recording, and if you have any questions, there's going to be opportunities for you to follow up with us. And we're here as a resource. Sylvamo's here as a resource. Matthew is saying, thank you, everyone. First time in one of these. Matthew, will you be back? You want to be back to the next session? Matthew, thank you for being with us. Chris, it's good to see you. Michelle says, thank you. Ian is saying, thank you. Rob says, thank you. Matthew will be back. All right, folks, from me here at Mindfire as your moderator and the entire Sylvamo team and everyone on the panel here today, thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Bye-bye.